exciting news is that we have a knowledgeable and experienced guest from the world of finance, Jose Maria Linares, who is Senior Executive Vice President at Banco Santander for Corporate and Investment Banking. Jose has a wealth of experience in the banking world, having worked in a variety of positions at JP Morgan Chase, Societe Generale, Oppenheimer, and Morgan Stanley. He's a graduate of Babson College and has an MBA from Columbia. And looking to where do we start the conversation, I think we have to go to Bolivia. And Alberto, I think you had a Bolivian question in mind.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Jose, welcome to our podcast, and really happy to have you talking with us today. Let's begin to business immediately. Let's talk about Bolivia. A new government, a lot of challenges again. Just in the last week, we have seen that the government has beginning to announce certain economical measures, fiscal austerity measures. They are trying to do a 30% cut in public spending. They have to scrap a couple of taxes, like the gain tax to the millionaires, basically. And then, but there is a lot of pressure as well, political pressure, social pressure, a government that the president and vice president not are always in the same line. And also probably the most important, a context of financial and economic crisis that the government needs urgently to address. So what is your view in terms of the challenges and opportunities that is offering now Bolivia in the current context?
So very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Really exciting times for Bolivia. Let's start there. The panorama is a very difficult one. But Bolivia has been there before, and many other countries around the world have been there before, and some of them have corrected their history and they become investable places. So the first measures that the past government is announcing are pro-business. And I think that is the key thing. I think we get a break from the ideology of the right, the left. I think we're here in the world where it's a poor country in its investments. By the way, it is a poor country from a financial perspective because in the rest, it's actually a very wealthy country in terms of natural resources, the opportunities, etc. So I would say, to summarize the opportunity, there's going to be the short term, the medium term, long term. In the short term, we need to stabilize the fiscal situation. The government is already working with multilateral agencies, so the IMF, Corporación Andina de Fomento, and others, to stabilize the situation, bring dollars into the country. So that's positive. The currency has stabilized, at least for now. And so that's first step, typical. Second step, you're going to see that a lot of Bolivians that have some wealth abroad are going to bet back to their country. We've saw that in Argentina. We saw that in every single country this process happens, there's money that comes back from the locals, right? Because they see the opportunities. The third element, which is more medium term now, it is reactivating the multinational corporations that are already there, but over the years, they've reduced massively the investment because the opportunities weren't there. And the last element, it is attracting capital from places such as the Middle East, sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, but also other multinationals that will see the opportunity and come back to the country. So I think that is the playbook as we see it right now. I think it is a really tall order what needs to happen and the measures that the past presidency has to take. But we're very excited to see the first signals.
And so I'll continue along those routes. So thank you very much, Jose, for this introduction. And is Santander going to place a part in this next wave for Bolivia? And as a segue question, I think it would be interesting to know where Santander is currently placing its biggest bets in Latin America at the moment. It seems to be a very important region for the bank.
I don't think I'm exaggerating if I say that Santander is the largest foreign direct investor in Latin America, right? We own one, two, or three banks: Mexico, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, and we have very strong presence, especially on the corporate investment banking side, in Peru, Colombia, and increasingly servicing clients in Ecuador, Paraguay, but also in Central America. So obviously, if there is an opportunity in Bolivia for us to do business, I think from a global perspective, we are the most suited global financial institution to help that country. We have plenty of knowledge around stabilization programs. We've been very, very close in Argentina when the country is open. We're currently helping Peru and its biggest companies there. So when those processes that are pro-business happens, Santander typically tends to lead. So if this path is serious, I think it is, I will be delighted for Santander to play a role.
I think, sorry to interrupt. I think Julian also had a wider concern, didn't you? We were chatting earlier on what investors are getting right and wrong and in the current state of Latin America.
Well, I would say it is a tale of two cities, right? From a global perspective, equity valuations are at its peak, right? Credit spreads are as tight as they've ever been. And so I think markets, from a global perspective, are placed for perfection. Look at the price of, gold, look at the price of commodities, and the overall financial system. Liquidity is available, and it tends to ignore all the geopolitical problems that the world is currently facing. Latin America is a bit different because of years of anti-business governments. The share of investments that went into Latin America diminished dramatically. In fact, when I say that we're probably the largest foreign direct investor in the region, it's partly because a lot of our competitors or other multinationals have exited the region. So I think in Latin America, there is, from a portfolio perspective, a huge opportunity for global portfolios to come back into the region. And capital moves very fast. We're obviously very close to the Argentine situation. We own one of the largest banks in the country. And since the Malay administration came in, we have participated pretty much, I believe, in every single transaction, big transactions happen in the country. So Vaca Muerta, for example, or Telecom Argentina buying Telefonica, helping the government with a lot of the structures in terms of repos, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if the signals are there for investors to participate in a recovery, they'll come back. And so I was in Chile, early this week, and Peru the week before. You're seeing, government changes there, and you already have, the locals beginning to be more optimistic. The foreigners will follow. So that creates a virtuous circle, which is great. Again, Latin America has a lot of competitive advantages in the new geopolitical scene or map. And therefore, if you have governments that are pro-business and the institutions are strong and protect private capital, I think there will be capital availability.
I would like to go a little bit deeper in this very short around that, because you mentioned very well the whole situation in Latin America, and there is at the moment a trend of pro-business governments in various countries in the region. And others, like Brazil, probably are going to try to establish a little bit of the status quo, or there are these tensions between the conservative and the progressive left with Lula, although it is a moderate left. For a business perspective, Brazil is still a country that attracting investments? Do you think the government is pro-business in that area, or they need to do more?
They need to do more, right? It's been slow going for the last 2 years. Interest rates are at 15%, right? That means that real interest rates are about 10%. Businesses do not survive with 10% real interest rates. And so clearly, that environment in the last 2 to 3 years, you have the giant of the region, which is the most important player, which has everything to win, by the way. Scale, size,
Yeah.
resources, the whole thing. And so if Brazil would move to a more pro-business environment, I think the opportunities will be enormous, not just for Brazil, but it will have an impact as well in the rest of the region because it is the giant of Latin America.
Could I just say, is there a political difficulty in that you perhaps need a centrist government in Brazil that's pro-business, as you say, but at the moment the political system doesn't seem to be creating that kind of a figure? Are you worried by the run up to the elections in October in Brazil?
If you are a Latin American follower or watcher, you're always worried about the run up of the elections because the outcomes are going to be so different depending on who wins. And so, therefore, if you look at the market, not just my own personal view, but if you look at the market, there is a lot of uncertainty that is priced in Brazilian valuations. And I think from here till election day, you're going to see a lot of volatility depending on who's sort of the front runner, what are the polls telling you, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not a politician. I'm a businessman. I think if a government is pro-business, I don't care if it's from the left, from the right, and the institutions are respected, and those trends are long-term and not reversed, which has been the problem of Latin America. Latin America has been here before. I started this business in the 90s, right, when the whole privatization process started, et cetera, and there was a lot of optimism, and then we went to waste, generate a generation. And I've spent also an enormous amount of time in Asia. I just came back from, I was in Asia, and they have not interrupted their progress. In spite of different governments, left, right, political problems, they will always exist. But the governments have maintained their pro-business stance, and therefore, if you spend 10, 20, 30 years and you come back, you see the real progress in terms of GDP per capita, infrastructure spending, education, health, and the rest. So real benefits to society. So part of what I'm excited about this time around is the US, for the first time in years or decades, is actually back interested in Latin America. And that's self-evident. And therefore, I would hope that this reversal of a trend that we're seeing, starting in Argentina, but also, Ecuador, and other countries, Bolivia now, will have a longer term view. Remember that Goni started that process, 2 decades ago? And we're all very excited about that. And he actually did have enormous benefits. All of that was wasted. So we got to stop this cycle of up and down, changing courses, because as I said before, the continent has what it takes to win. It is about staying the course with the right policies.
And so just to carry on with this, so I'm thinking about the bank structure, about how you operate across South America, Latin America, but also North America, since you've been making some moves in North America. The Bloomberg article mentioning you and as you said yourself, helping the Argentine peso very recently. So does that mean that is it going to be an integrated strategy whereby the structure, well, there's a Spanish bank originally, and then how will you maneuver across the North America and the South America? Is going to be an entire. So will it be just one regional or one continent merging the two together, or is it going to be individual by countries? How will you do that?
So there are several businesses within Santander. The one that I'm responsible for, which is the corporate investment bank, and that operates on a global basis and cross-border, and it's a global business, right?
Yeah.
But also Santander has some enormous retail presence in many of those countries, the US, and what I've said before, right? Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, etc. Also in Europe, where I'm based in London, where we've just purchased, by the way, another bank. Very excited about that. And so it isn't, from a corporate investment banking perspective, we already operate seamlessly. From a retail perspective, it's a different business because despite the fact that there are global commonalities, it is local regulation that defines the attractiveness of that business. So from a corporate investment banking perspective, where we can help governments, investors, institutions, and businesses, we have the ability to operate end to end. We have a very strong presence in the US. As you mentioned, you read all the Bloomberg articles. We're very close to the action there. And, we're happy to help.
Could I jump in with a bit of a confession? I'm a journalist, and sometimes we believe our own propaganda. I've been writing a lot about the energy transition, and the standard thing I will write in an article is that Latin America is very well placed to take advantage of the energy transition. It's got the oil, it's got the sun, it's got the wind, it's got, green hydrogen potential. But in a sense, what I'm saying is, am I being a bit over optimistic? Does Santander see real, if you like, financial returns from the energy transition?
Enormous. And I don't think I exaggerate when I say we're probably the largest infra bank in the world, and also one of the key enablers of the energy transition globally. And Latin America has a lot of the elements to be successful. One is the minerals. And look at commodity prices right now. I just came back from Peru, right? They change presidents, very often. 3% growth. Can you imagine if you would have stable government? Central bank is great in Peru, by the way. They've done an awesome job. But can you imagine if they have more visibility? That country should be growing at, 8, 9%. Asia-like. It has everything, right? Copper, lithium, all kinds of things for the electrification of the world. Same in Chile, by the way. And a lot of the deals that Santander has done in the region has been around, power generation, transmission, minerals, etc. Having said that, we also have played an important role in the development of Vaca Muerta. So this is conventional oil, right, and gas.
Yeah.
And I think that countries that have resources have the right to develop themselves and their natural resources. And I think that no matter what happens, we're going into a world where far more renewable energy will be created than conventional energy. Think about AI, artificial intelligence. In the next 10 years, we're probably going to see the most transformational impact that we've seen in society in our generation. More than the internet, more than the mobile phones, this is going to change a lot. For AI to be successful, it requires two things that are crucial. One is data centers, and the other one is the power the energy to power the data centers. And so we're spending a lot of effort with clients in making sure that those ecosystems are built in Latin America, but also in the rest of the world. So I agree with you. I am very optimistic that Latin America can leapfrog into these areas because it has everything: hydro, solar, wind, and the minerals to deal with this.
And so does that mean that you so in terms of the advisory that you give, so we see in Latin America, we did a piece with Alberto across tracking Chinese investments in all the areas that you're talking about, which have been pretty strong over the past 10 years, let's say. And particularly in what do you call Chile, there was some big infrastructure move there. Brazil, we spotted many things. Colombia, all across the subcontinent. Is your advisory also extending to the Asian countries, Japan or other countries who may want to enter Latin America and get exposures to those critical industries that you mentioned?
Yeah, look, I think so. Not only we provide advice, but also we provide financing. Right? Yeah. We provide both. I think if you go back 8-7 years ago, there was an enormous interest for Chinese SOEs that took very strong positions in Latin America. Santander was in the middle of most of them. So we did the vast majority of those transactions. About 3 to 4 years ago, that appetite diminished. And you're beginning to see, at the same time, a significant increase in appetite for the Middle Eastern countries. So Qatar, the Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, which are beginning to play an important role. I would think that going forward, the US will also play a very important role here. So I think it is not only the Chinese that have taken positions in Latin America. We're beginning to see, again, the Middle East and the US getting here.
Sure.
And by the way, one of the things that we didn't mention, typically the locals are the first ones to buy their own thing, right?
Yeah.
Which also they're the first ones to exit where they don't believe in the governments. And so we're beginning to see a lot of, the groups, the local groups investing in their own assets, which is very exciting because that is what creates the resilience in the system as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You have mentioned something that I think is really important when we were talking about the energy transition, natural resources, all the potential in the region. There is, as a journalist, I always say, a critical element across Latin America, especially in certain areas, are the local communities. In the past, part of the problem has been these local communities tend to be too politicized sometimes, or sometimes not open to allow investments going to these areas because they are suspicious sometimes for historical reason or element. Now that there is a change in the region, are you seeing a change also in this kind of perception? Do you think governments are now more open to work with local communities? And you as an investor, do you think it has to need more work with local communities as well to change that perception that foreign investment or investment sometimes is good, not seen as something that could be negative to these communities?
I would hope so. And it's case by case, right? It's hard to generalize. I'll give you an example. I was with a main shareholder of one of the largest pulp and paper companies in Chile, the one that I mentioned before, that has this $4.5 billion investment in a particular state in Brazil. The village where they're building this plant is going to be one of the most modern plants in the world, by the way. They have something like 15,000 people in the community. They're building a village with everything, right? Hospitals, education, right? Schools, housing, etc., to accommodate for another 15,000 people. And so I think the reason that communities get politicized is because they don't see the benefits of this direct investment. I think for any investment to be sustainable over time, you need to see the wealth accruing to the different stakeholders. And I think smart investors are going to factor that in their business plans.
I'm just wondering, we've got about 5 minutes of our allocated time remaining. And I was just wondering if we should tackle one of the more difficult questions we prepared for you, which is to look at the outlook for the next 5 years with an idea of what may be unappreciated trends, I suppose opportunities and risks in that 5-year period. And I understand you've already spoken about that quite a lot because we've been talking about the energy transition and the whole artificial intelligence. But I think the question is, what are likely to be the big ones between now and 2030?
I think the first opportunity is the tremendous infrastructure deficit in Latin America. You look at Asia and Latin America today as two different planets. They were not that dissimilar 30 years ago. And you can't link cities in Latin America. Just to get to Bolivia is just a nightmare. Whereas the rest of the world is very interconnected. So it's opportunity number one. Number two, it is participating in the natural resources demand that is crucial for the energy transition and the advent of artificial intelligence, which will consume far more energy than the world consumes today.
Yeah.
The third element is agro, right? Latin America should be able to feed the rest of the world at the right price. And therefore, all of that should be very helpful. And again, if you look at the plain vanilla demographics, a young population compared to the rest of the world, if you look at the solo model in economics, that is the key single most important variable in economic growth. So that makes me optimistic. The literacy has improved. We need to do better. But all of that also, finally, so I talked about all the export elements. But if you think about all the Spanish-speaking people between Latin America, the US, which is gigantic, and Spain, there is a common market for, culture, media, events, unified by same language that is gigantic. So I think it, as I said before, and by the way, I just want to make it clear, it is the first time in my career that I am optimistic about Latin America. The last time I was in my early 20s when I started the business. And so, because there are people that are perennially optimistic, yeah. I wasn't. It is a change in my perception, but there's still a lot that can go wrong. We've been here in this position before, and I hope that the governments and societies have the fortitude to really become pro-business and stay the course.
Thank you very much. I think this is a sort of a possible podcast endpoint.
Very good. Good to see you guys.